All right, strap yourselves in for this one because today we're diving headfirst into Nigerian politics.
Ooh, this is a good one.
Yeah, we're looking specifically at the recent local government elections in Osun State. And we've got some news articles that are going to take us through a story that is seriously wilder than any political thriller I've seen recently.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about this, it's not just like some local election in a small town somewhere. This actually gets at the heart of some of the really big dynamics in Nigeria.
Okay.
So you've got the power dynamics between different levels of government. You've got the role of the police.
Okay.
And it even raises questions about like the democratic process in Nigeria itself.
Okay, so let's start from the beginning.
Yeah.
What were the results? What happened?
So the People's Democratic Party, the PDP, they pulled off something that you almost never see.
Okay.
A total clean sweep.
Wow.
They won all 30 chairmanship positions.
So like the heads of local government.
Yeah, exactly. They're kind of like the mayors.
Okay.
And then not only that, they won every single councilorship position.
So like the council members.
Yeah, the local council members.
Okay, wow. So a total clean sweep. That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah, it is.
It almost seems like it shouldn't even be possible given everything that was going on around this election.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly a normal election.
Yeah.
We're not talking about the usual pre-election jitters.
Right.
There were serious legal challenges. There were concerns about security.
Uh-huh.
So serious that the police got involved.
Yeah.
And then on top of all that, there were even reports of violence with fatalities.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold on. Fatalities? What do you mean?
Yeah, sadly, reports indicate that 6 people actually died in clashes between supporters of the PDP and the other big party, the All Progressives Congress.
Okay.
The APC.
So APC, they were the main, I guess, rivals in this election?
Yeah, they're the other big party in Nigeria.
Okay.
And these clashes happened before the election even took place.
Wow. Okay, this is already getting intense. So let's go back to the legal challenges.
Yeah.
One of the articles mentioned that the Attorney General of the Federation, Lateef Fagbemi, he'd actually advised against holding the elections.
He did.
So what was going on there? What was the reasoning?
Okay, so the background for this is that there was a recent Court of Appeal ruling that reinstated some local government officials who had been removed previously.
Okay.
So the Attorney General argued that legally, these officials, they should have stayed in their positions until October 2025.
Gotcha.
So his point was basically that holding these elections now would actually violate the Constitution.
Okay, but the Osun State government didn't listen, right?
Nope, they didn't.
They went ahead with the election.
They pushed forward, and they argued that there was a ruling from the Osun State High Court that gave them the authority to go ahead.
Okay.
So you've got this legal tug-of-war going on.
Wow.
The state government directly defying the federal government.
Okay, and what's even more interesting is that the Osun State High Court, like, their ruling acknowledged what the Attorney General was saying.
Yeah, they did.
But they decided to prioritize having, democratically elected local officials.
Yeah, they were basically like, we understand what you're saying, but we think it's more important to have people in place who have actually been voted in.
Wow, that's a pretty bold move. I mean, it makes you wonder how this whole thing's going to affect the relationship between state and federal governments going forward. If states can just defy the federal government like this, what does that mean for Nigeria?
Yeah, it definitely raises some big questions about the balance of power in Nigeria.
Right.
And then, to complicate things even further, we've got to talk about the police getting involved.
Oh, yeah. So the articles mentioned that the police actually took some pretty drastic measures. So, like, what happened? What did they do?
This is going to sound like something out of a movie, but the police, they were concerned about potential violence, citing, quote, credible intelligence. They actually sealed off the headquarters of the Electoral Commission.
Really?
Yeah, so the body that's responsible for running the elections, they sealed off their headquarters.
Wow.
And they even arrested some staff members.
Oh, my goodness. So it sounds like they were trying to shut the whole thing down.
Yeah, pretty much.
But the election did happen, so how'd they manage to put it off?
They got creative. The commission, they had to relocate to a secret location.
Wow.
Just to conduct the election.
A secret location. Talk about commitment.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
But it also makes you wonder, like, what were the police really up to?
Yeah, what was their agenda?
Why were they trying to shut it down?
Well, some sources are actually alleging that the police were acting in favor of the APC.
Okay.
Maybe hoping to help them maintain control of the local governments.
So we've got conflicting legal opinions.
Yeah.
We've got a state government defying the federal government.
Yeah.
We've got the police in the middle of all of this.
This is getting complicated.
Yeah, like a political thriller in real time. But before we get too swept up in all the drama, let's go back to the election results themselves. So the PDP, they won in a landslide, but there are some interesting and conflicting things being said about voter turnout.
Yeah, that's right. Some reports describe the turnout as pretty low, which wouldn't be surprising
Right.
given the chaos around the election.
Yeah.
But then you've got the Osun State government claiming a 60% turnout.
Okay, that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, it is.
What could account for such a discrepancy?
It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
Without more information, it's possible that the government's figure is inflated, maybe for political reasons, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe certain areas just saw much higher turnouts than others, which kind of skews the overall percentage.
Right.
Either way, it definitely raises questions about, the accuracy and transparency of the reported results.
Yeah. Okay, let's shift gears for a second and talk about Governor Adeleke.
Okay,
So he's the one who insisted on holding the elections in the first place, right?
he did.
And he's a PDP member himself.
That's right.
It kind of makes you wonder if this whole thing was about more than just upholding democracy.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. So Governor Adeleke, he cast his vote, and then he went on to publicly praise the Electoral Commission,
Okay.
describe the elections as peaceful.
Okay, considering the violence and all the police intervention, that seems a little, I don't know, optimistic.
Yeah, I'd say so. And then there's this one little detail about Governor Adeleke that I found super interesting. After casting his vote, he actually referred to President Tinubu, who's from the opposing party, the APC, as a true Democrat.
Oh, wow. That is interesting, especially considering the history between these two parties. They haven't exactly gotten along in the past.
Yeah, definitely not.
So is this genuine respect, or is there something else going on, some political strategy at play?
It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely adds another layer of intrigue to this whole thing.
Yeah, it really does. So we've got a contested election with surprising outcome, legal battles, police getting involved, and even fatalities.
It's a lot.
Yeah, this is a lot to unpack. So where do we even go from here?
Well, I think to really understand what's going on here, we need to take a closer look at the potential consequences. Like, what does this mean for future elections in Nigeria? Will we see more clashes between state and federal governments? And what about the people of Osun State? How are their lives going to be impacted by all these power struggles?
Yeah, so many questions.
Definitely a lot to consider.
And that's exactly what we're going to be exploring in the rest of this deep dive.
Absolutely. Stay tuned.
Buckle up. It's easy to get caught up in the immediate drama, the legal battles and the police and the shocking results. But what's really fascinating about this deep dive, I think, is what it tells us about Nigeria as a whole. Like, what does this say about their political landscape?
Totally. I mean, this local election, it's a window into the state of democracy in Nigeria. It's complicated, full of contradictions. It's a really nuanced picture.
Okay, so unpack some of those contradictions for me. When it comes to democracy in Nigeria, what are we seeing?
So, on the one hand, you could argue that the fact that this election happened at all shows how resilient the democratic process can be.
Right. Like, even with the police intervention, the Electoral Commission, they relocated to a secret location just to make sure it happened.
Right, they were determined, and the Osun State government, they stood up to the federal government. They stuck to their interpretation of the law. They were committed to their idea of the democratic process.
But then there's the other side. The reports of violence, the police interference, the conflicting numbers about voter turnout, all that casts a shadow over the whole thing.
Definitely. Those are some serious red flags about how legitimate this election really was. It makes you think that maybe some powerful forces were trying to manipulate things to get the outcome they wanted.
So it's kind of a mixed bag then. Some signs point to a working democracy, but then there are these signs that maybe things aren't as good as they seem.
Exactly. And that's how it is with situations like this, right?
Yeah.
There are no easy answers. It's not clear-cut good guys and bad guys. You've got all these competing interests and interpretations and motivations.
This has really been eye-opening. Nigerian politics is a lot more complicated than I realized.
Oh, it's dynamic, for sure. Constantly evolving. This whole thing in Osun State, it's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
And that's what I love about these deep dives. We start with one event that seems isolated, and then we see all these connections to these big, overarching themes. It's like peeling back layers of an onion.
It really is. Each layer reveals something new, something you weren't expecting. And sometimes you realize how interconnected everything is.
Okay, so with all that in mind, what do you think are the long-term implications of this election? Not just for Osun State, but for Nigeria in general.
Well, it's hard to say for sure what's going to happen, but I think this situation could embolden other states to push back against the federal government. We might see a kind of ripple effect across the country as regions start asserting themselves more, interpreting laws in their own way.
So this could be a real turning point in the balance of power between states and the federal government.
It's a real possibility. And then there are the general elections coming up in Nigeria. How is this going to affect the strategies of the PDP and the APC? Will things get more aggressive? More legal challenges? Will the political tensions escalate?
Wow. A lot to think about. And what about the role of the judiciary in all this? It seems like they're right in the middle of this power struggle.
They're key. The judiciary needs to be seen as impartial, as a force for stability above all the partisan politics. If people start thinking they're being influenced by political interests, that's going to undermine trust in the whole legal system. And that has huge implications for the rule of law in Nigeria.
That's scary to think about. We also can't forget about the people who are actually living in Osun State. Their lives are directly affected by whoever's in power.
Absolutely. Access to services, safety, economic opportunities, all of that depends on the decisions of the people in power. This isn't some abstract political game. These elections have real consequences for real people.
So the stakes are really high. We've talked about the balance of power, the upcoming elections, the judiciary, and the people of Osun State. Is there anything else we need to consider to really understand what happened here?
We haven't mentioned the media yet, and they have a huge role to play in all this.
Yeah, that's true. They shape public perception. They report on events. They hold people in power accountable. They have to make sure information is accurate and fair.
Especially in a situation like this. You've got all this conflicting information, accusations flying around. They have to be extra careful. Sensationalism or biased reporting could do a lot of damage. We need balanced and nuanced coverage that gives a voice to everyone involved.
It's a tough job, but it's so important. A free press is essential for a functioning democracy.
Couldn't agree more. They're the watchdogs. They keep things transparent and hold those in power accountable. They're the eyes and ears of the people.
Okay, we've covered so much ground. We've looked at what happened during the election itself. We've talked about Nigerian politics, and we've explored the potential consequences. If we had to boil all of this down to one key takeaway for our listeners, what would it be?
I think the main takeaway is that this election, even though it happened in Osun State, it's a microcosm of the bigger issues facing Nigeria. It shows us the struggle for power, the balance between different levels of government, the importance of a strong and independent judiciary, media, and electoral system.
It's a reminder that democracy is a process. It's not something you achieve and then you're done. You have to be constantly vigilant, actively participate, be willing to have conversations even when you disagree.
Yeah, I like that. So I think it's time we wrap up this deep dive, but I do have one final thought-provoking question for our listener to think about.
I gotta say, this whole deep dive has left me with a lot to think about.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Like, it's inspiring to see people fighting for democracy, with everything going on.
Yeah.
But the potential for things to get manipulated, the violence, it's scary. It makes you realize just how fragile the whole system is.
It really does. It's a constant battle to uphold democratic ideals, especially when there are forces working against them. But that's why it's so important for everyone to stay informed and engaged.
I agree. But where do we even begin? What can we actually do? I mean, what can I as an individual do to help ensure that democracy survives, not just in Osun State, but in Nigeria as a whole?
That's the question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer. But I think the first step is taking personal responsibility. We can't just sit back and watch. We need to be active citizens.
Okay, so what does that look like?
It starts with being informed, and not just from one source. Read different news outlets. Be critical of the information you're seeing, and don't be afraid to challenge your own biases.
It's so easy to get stuck in echo chambers, especially online. It takes real effort to look for different perspectives.
It does, and when you do engage with those perspectives, do it respectfully. Don't avoid tough conversations. Listen to what people are saying. Even if you disagree, you might learn something new. And even if you don't change your mind, at least you'll understand where the other person is coming from.
Yeah, building bridges, right.
Exactly. But it's not enough to just talk. We need to take action.
So how do we do that?
Think local, get involved in your community, go to local government meetings, participate in peaceful protests, volunteer for organizations that are doing work you believe in, and hold your elected officials accountable. Ask questions, demand transparency, make sure your voice is heard.
Of course, we can't forget about voting.
Absolutely. Your vote is your voice. It's a way to shape the future you want to see, not just for yourself, but for your community and your country.
I think that's a great note to end on. This deep dive into the Osun State elections has been a whirlwind. We've learned so much, we've felt a lot of emotions, and we've gained some real insight. But I think the main thing I'm taking away from this is that democracy isn't just something we watch happen. It's something we participate in. It's a journey, not a destination. And we all have a role to play in making sure it moves in the right direction.
Beautifully said. So to our listener out there, I leave you with this thought. What will your role be? How will you help strengthen democracy, not just in your community, but in the world around you?
And remember, the goal of the deep dive is to empower you. We want to give you the knowledge to ask critical questions and to inspire you to become active and engaged citizens.
Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better future.
And until next time, keep diving deep.